all over the globe that summer. I was an all-star that year, defensive player of the year, runner-up MVP of the league. I mean, I had an incredible, incredible year. And I played the medal round. Ended up getting Olympic player, basketball player of the year that year after we won the gold medal. I flew back. I look at my mom. I said, Mom, I don't feel too well. She's like, well, you had a rough summer. You're tired. So I said, okay. I said, well, I went in, got my physical, and preseason physical, getting ready for the season. I was ready to go. Still a little tired. Still saw some edema in my legs. Still, raising concern. But I knew that was going to be all right because, I was in the best shape of my life. I could leap tall buildings in a single bound. That was my mentality. I felt invincible. And I come out of my physical, and they called me the next day, and team doctor said, hey, man, there's some abnormalities in your body chemistries. And I was like, what does that mean? And he said, well, we got to send you to a nephrologist. I said, well, what is that? And he said, that's a kidney doctor. He said, it's just your levels are off. So I went, saw the kidney doctor. And he said, you know what? I want to order a biopsy. And I said, well, what is that? Mind you, all of this is coming at me. I'm 30 years old, and I'm focused on basketball. I'm focused on winning the championship that year. Pat had brought in some new players, and we were ready to go. This was a big year for us, And he did the biopsy. I got sick after the biopsy. I went home. I was laying in the bed, and the next day, he calls me. He said, hey, man, your biopsy results come back. He said, you have a rare kidney disorder called FSGS. And I sit up in the bed. I remember this like it was yesterday. I sit up in the bed, phone to my ear, and I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, this is very rare. He said, we don't have a lot of information on it right now. He said, but you're going to probably be on dialysis within the year, and you're going to probably need a transplant in less than a year. And I said, hold up. I didn't understand what was going on. I was a little confused. I said, so what does this mean? I said, do I have to stop playing basketball? He's like, I don't know. And then I said, am I going to die? And he paused. And he didn't answer me fast enough. And he said, no. He said, but we have to, he said, eventually you will. He said, but we have to get to the bottom of this first. So I said, thanks, Doc. I hung up the phone, and my head fell into my hands, and I sat on the side of the bed, and I said, God, I'm not going to ask you why me, but why now? Why right this second? Why am I going through this right now? Unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that there was a much bigger picture down the road. Fast forward, I tried to come back and play. I had to sit out. We made the announcement. I had to step away from the game of basketball. I was out for about 6 months. Tried to come back and play during the playoffs because my kidney condition had gotten a little better. We found one of the best nephrologists in the world. His name is Dr. Gerald Appel in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. He recommended that I start taking these oral regimen of medicine to slow the progression of the disease down. He said, but we don't have a cure for this. I started feeling a little bit better. I was a test rat to those doctors because they had never dealt with a patient my size, so they was trying to get the level of medication down to the dosage that I needed for somebody my size. So I had good days and I had bad days. It was rough, but I was still working out. I was still playing on my own time, trying to stay in shape. I finally came back, tried to play in the playoffs. I was depleted, went that summer, ended up sitting out. That following year, they told me the Heat told me they weren't going to re-sign me. So there were some other takers out there, so I ended up going to New Jersey. I played for the New Jersey Nets for a couple of years. The convenience of that was my doctors were at Columbia Presbyterian, and I was right there in the tri-state area. So from that perspective, I was close to my doctors, and they were monitoring me, and I started playing for the Nets. Still never on dialysis at all, never needed it at all. So one day I got the call. Dr. Appel calls me. He said, hey man, every week I had to take my labs because they had to monitor my body chemistries. They wanted to make sure that my potassium levels didn't get too high because I could risk a cardiac arrest on the court. So Dr. Appel calls me and he said, look, I know you're about to go on this road trip, but I can't let you go. And I'm in the middle of a workout. And I said, wow, what's going on? He said, well, I need you to step off the court right now. He said, because your levels have gotten high. And he said, it's time. And I said, it's time for what? He said, it's time for you to find a donor. You need this transplant. So it took me 3 years from the time I was diagnosed to get the transplant. The story about the transplant goes as this. I had a lot of family members, I had a lot of people step up to the plate and want to be a donor. And my second cousin, Jason Cooper, came into the picture. I hadn't seen him in over 25 years. My grandmother was dying at the time. I made the announcement. It was all over the news, ESPN and everything. Alonzo Mourning has retired from the game. He's going to need a transplant. Jason drove from New York to Virginia to visit his aunt, which was my grandmother. He's in the hospital room with my father, and they look up at the screen while my grandmother is in her bed. And Jason looks at my father and said, hey, you know, Alonzo doesn't know that I live in New York, but if he needs me, tell him to give me a call. My dad calls me the next day and he's like, hey, your cousin, he wants to come in and get tested to see if he can be a donor. And I was like, which cousin? Because my mom has 5 sisters and 5 brothers, and my dad has 3 sisters. So I had a lot of cousins. So he explained to me, as Jason, you hadn't seen him in over 20-some years. He wants to come in. So I saw Jason. Out of all the people that came in to get tested, the doctors chose Jason. Shortly after that, my grandmother passed. So it's amazing how my grandmother's death brought me life. Jason ended up being the donor. Here I am 21 years later with that transplant. By the grace of God, yeah, thank you.